You will be talking about building and ensuring an ESG-compliant supply chain.
Exactly. So maybe the data protection worked already. My real name is Maximilian but no worries. So I hid my identity very well. Yeah, building and ensuring an ESG-compliant system, an ESG-compliant supply chain. So what are we going to talk about today? So today I'm going to take you on a journey. We are going into the regulatory direction. So I'm going to talk a little bit about CSDDD. So when we're talking about sustainability in Europe right now, of course, CSDDD is about to come. But then we're also taking a look into, kind of future key market trends. We heard a few of those trends already, so it's good we can build up on that. But because we are in contact with a lot of customers, with a lot of partners, with a lot of experts, maybe I can share some light into more trends, especially from a sustainability perspective. So who am I and who are we? Before I talk about the company, so we're a software solution who is doing supply chain sustainability. I'm a sustainability expert. I'm part of a whole team. Why am I mentioning that? This is because we're not just a software solution, but we're also trying to support our customers with knowledge. So the sustainability team is trying to break down the regulations into small digestible pieces. We really support our customers here understanding the regulations and also supporting on how to use the platform to be compliant and to even more to drive smart sustainability. What are we doing? So we are an end-to-end supply chain sustainability suite or solution. So we're working in many different directions. We have many different modules. Of course, we have supply chain due diligence, but also supply chain visibility. This is also a very interesting tool we have, which you can also see at our booth number 3. We're also dealing with carbon emissions. So we have a navigator for that. We have things in the direction of product compliance, which is becoming more interesting in the future. And of course, we are dealing with reporting and declarations so that in the end you can drive sustainable procurement, really going into sustainable sourcing decisions. Just a quick shout out or thanks to all of our 500 plus customers. Why am I saying this? Because they were responsible for onboarding over 2 million active suppliers to the platform. And this is really where we shine the most, because we built the largest supplier network here in terms of sustainability. And this is first-hand data we're getting from the suppliers. So we're always doing a mixture between different risk analysis. So of course we have abstract risk analysis where we're covering data just by looking at the risk exposure of countries or of industries. But then we are also having this vast network of suppliers where they can create a profile and where they can enter certificates data, first-hand data, and are also liable for this data. All right. Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. So with all the abbreviations going on in the European Union, I always have to look that I'm not saying corporate social due diligence and so on. So let's see what this really entails. So basically what we're facing here is the EU approach or the EU directive for supply chain due diligence. And so big companies in the European Union are affected, and also companies who are doing business in the European Union. And now the question arises, okay, why do we need this actually? Why do we need a law or a directive on that? And this is not news, but global supply chains often are responsible for violation when it comes to human rights, when it comes to environmental harm. And voluntary actions are great. These are very important, but they are not really sufficient when it comes to abolishing those harms or at least mitigating those violations. So what's the purpose now of the CSDDD? So the purpose is really to identify, to prevent, and also to address these negative human rights and environmental impacts. First of all, in your own business operations, but then also further down the supply chains or the whole value chain in total. And also, don't let sustainability become a side topic. Really integrate this into your corporate governance. Make this a strategic point. Yeah, and then a lot of people are also asking this, hey, why should we do this as an EU directive? I mean, first of all, it's politics. It's about aligning EU values so that the EU values are also aligned with international standards so that all the businesses have the same practices on human rights and environmental pollution. And this really is an approach to try to prevent the fragmentation of national law, so that we don't see a lot of national laws like the Germans did, but that we are like combining this into one directive. Of course, they have to be transposed into national laws, but then at least with the same foundation. And with this, the EU wants to kind of provide this consistent legal framework and therefore also a fair competition among all the players in the European Union. And the CSDDD is not alone. It comes with a few other abbreviations like the CSRD and CBAM. So we really see this horizontal approach with the EU Green Deal to really speed up the due diligence obligations in the whole Union. So again, what are the key requirements here? So when you are falling under the CSDDD, you have to follow different due diligence obligations. And we can see that they are forming kind of a process, and we're also seeing additional obligations. So let's take you through the products, and then I will also say something about impacts in general. So first of all, you have to establish a due diligence policy. Of course, you have to lay down your strategy. You have to lay out how you want to approach this topic, and you also have to publicly communicate this. So once you've done this, you have to identify, assess, and prioritize adverse or negative impacts. And you realize that I'm talking a lot about impacts and not really about risks. And I really want to encourage you to also shift the perspective from risk towards impacts, because risk is part of impacts, but impacts is more than just the probability of occurrence or the risks. So there are also other criteria that should value into this idea of thinking from an impact perspective. And this is, for example, the influence you have on the supplier. So for example, if you don't have any influence because your order volume is very low on this supplier, but you identify a risk with the supplier, you don't have any leverage to change this or to approach the supplier. So you really should put in other criteria in this as well. You also should kind of rank the different topics. You should think of, hey, maybe human rights violations like child labor are more severe than corruption, for example. So there are a lot of criteria you have to value in when thinking about impacts, and risk is just part of them. Once you identified those risks, you of course have to prevent and mitigate those risks. In best case, you end the adverse impacts. If you ended those impacts, it is in step 4 then your responsibility to remediate those impacts and try to set the status quo in place. Of course, with all due diligence regulations, you have to monitor the effectiveness and maybe adapt the process and then publicly communicate it into a report. Speaking of the other additional obligations you have to lay down a climate action plan where you propose a strategy on how your company should reach the Paris Agreement, so should reach net zero by 2050. And of course, you have to establish a complaint mechanism. You maybe already know this from the German Supply Chain Act, where stakeholders are able to file complaints to you, and you have to listen to those complaints and identify actual impacts, actual negative impacts here. And then you also have to engage with your stakeholders. So not just with your suppliers, but with all the affected humans and environmental positions that are affected by your business operation. So you have to consult them. You have to see how this process is affecting them, and if the situation is getting better. Maybe you heard the term omnibus. So omnibus is an approach from the European Union to kind of bureaucratize this whole process, to streamline this process. And you can see here, we see affected positions by that. I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into this later, but there are positions who will be streamlined. When you want to have more information, you can always approach me at the booth or write us an email. So we're really monitoring this closely. Next, if you are affected, I want to shortly talk about how you can transition to a CSDDD ready process, or how you can set up a process. You can transition if you have already a due diligence process in place, but you always should start with the understanding of the CSDDD. So you really have to think, okay, what's it about? Am I affected? When am I affected? What are my actual stakeholders, and so on? If you have due diligence practice in place, you have to do a gap analysis. So what's missing? What do I have to adapt to become CSDDD compliant? Next, you have to set up your project for CSDDD. So you have to align responsibilities. You have to align resources. You have to think of budget. You have to think of internal teams, external teams. You have to think of third-party provider. You have to think of data. You have to think of software solution on how to achieve this. And then you're setting up your project for CSDDD. Next, when you did this, you really go into the preparation and into the adaptation of your current due diligence process or of the newly set up process. So you have to get enabled with the different things. You have to maybe align the first tasks in your project group. You also have to form project groups that are intersectional, so that you have all the different branches on board. And then you can start with the last step, actually conducting this due diligence process. You think of the cycle again, and this is where you start this process. Just the first key takeaway here, what we always propose, don't wait until the law is already here, but really, I mean, you already have due diligence processes in place. So really start early with thinking about CSDDD. It really ensures good compliance, a better implementation, and therefore also a competitive advantage at some point. Although those 2 points are important, which you can think of in the preparation process. So you should engage your stakeholder at an early point by conducting surveys, by joining multi-stakeholder initiatives, by asking NGOs, hey, how are we actually affecting the people or the environment? So all of these are valid stakeholder engagement options, and you should start early with this. Same goes with the climate action plan. If you're not already doing something like that, then you should maybe think of how to incorporate this into your strategy. So I was talking about the omnibus already. I really make this quick. So the omnibus proposal was made in February. It is it's divided into 2 parts. So one, we have the Stop the Clock directive. So this is just to extend the implementation deadline of CSDDD. This gives us a little bit more time to prepare and also to understand the due diligence requirements. And then we also have the directive amendments. And this is also this is not yet final, so the Stop the Clock directive is already officially published, but then we also have the amendments, and these are streamlined changes in terms of value chain scope, in terms of liabilities, so that now member states are there to define the liabilities, and also some content adjustments for like streamlining topics and streamlining stakeholder engagement. Maybe a quick word on the omnibus, because it's a big political debate. I mean, now we're witnessing 2 things. So first, the CSDDD was established, and then there was a big backlash, and this is too much bureaucracy and so on. But now we have the omnibus, and the omnibus is really cutting down a few bureaucracy challenges. But now, you cannot say anything against it anymore, because, we went through the whole process. Hey, we implemented it, then we changed it. Okay, now everybody should be satisfied. So CSDDD will come. It will be postponed by 1 year, but it will come, and I think a lot of you will also be affected by it. All right, enough of the legal things, maybe one more slide on that, but let's take a look on some key market trends for supply chain sustainability. So first of all, again, increasing regulatory demands. And don't be afraid, but I'm showing you a wave of regulations now. And believe me, these are not all of them. So like I said, we're facing an almost exponential wave of regulation. And of course, we're seeing big regulations are getting streamlined, like the CSDDD. But on the other hand, we see a big fragmentation of a lot of small regulations here that you have to follow or that are coming up. You have the UFLPA, okay, you have REACH, rose conflict minerals, a lot of product compliance things. So you really need a solution to, a flexible solution to cover the regulations you are affected by, or to also are prepared for the upcoming regulations. Next, we see a push for transparency. And yeah, we heard this already. End-tier transparency is very topical right now. Why is that? This is because, especially in sustainability, human right violations and also environmental violations, they are not happening in your tier one supplier base, but they are happening way down the supply chain. They are happening where you're sourcing the materials or the minerals. They are happening in the mines or in countries of the global south. So you really need this transparency to identify those hidden impacts in your supply chain. And when you identify those hidden impacts, you can really drive sourcing decisions here. You can really think of, okay, this is how my deeper supply chain will look like. Maybe I can adapt my sourcing strategy to just be a little bit better geared for the future or to mitigate those impacts. And I just have one survey here, so I'm still being in line here. And this is not even the most striking example I brought with me, but so this is a study of Deloitte where they asked, hey, are you, how is it with your transparency in your end-tier supplier base, so beyond tier one suppliers? And here just 65% of the companies have little to no transparency in their, beyond their tier one suppliers. And like I said, this is the most favorable study we found. We even found studies where they are saying, especially in the German landscape, they like 90% have little to no transparency in their or beyond their tier one suppliers. And here we also developed a tool to really go into the deeper supply chains, because now it really is possible. So now we have the chance with technology and AI to look deeper into the supply chains and to identify negative impacts here, and also to address those impacts where they matter most. Next, I mean, we are on a Dun & Bradstreet conference here. Of course, data is key. And when we are looking at risk management, impact management in the supply chain from a sustainability directive, you always have to think as a funnel, where you are putting a lot of suppliers, a lot of stakeholders on the platform, and then run different risk analysis with your suppliers to really end up and to really prioritize your suppliers, because in the end you want to allocate your resources where they matter most, because you have limited resources, especially for sustainability. So you really have to think, okay, where do my resources matter most? And for that, we really need data, because like you see, when we're going down, we should start with a very good data foundation. And along the step, Dun & Bradstreet is providing our customers with the data, for example, with the industry data. So what industries are the suppliers working in? And with that, we can derive an industry risk, for example. And we easily can process a lot of those suppliers in the beginning. Next, we are sending out the assessments to the suppliers. So we really need to know, okay, where should we address those assessments to? What kind of topics should we ask those suppliers? And then in the end, when you end up with more data, we go into the impact analysis. We really want to see, okay, now we know the risk. Now we also want to know, hey, can we influence those suppliers? And then Dun & Bradstreet is providing our customers with the data for turnover, so that they can calculate the spend to turnover ratio to identify their influence they have on the supplier, subsequently the impact on those suppliers. And you can see we need data enhancement on all of those steps, starting with the foundation of the risk analysis all the way up to the prevention remediation phase. And then a very big topic. So we really see a shift from a compliance only to a value-driven approach. And last week we were in London, and London is, or UK is quite an interesting landscape. They were very like the first that are implementing due diligence guidelines, but then kind of stopped. And now they are going back to a value-driven approach. So it's not about just checking boxes, checking legal boxes, because, you know, the big overarching regulations, they are decreasing, but it's about the question again, okay, what really is sustainability about, and also how can we get value out of this? And here I brought a few examples. There are many more examples of what can those value look like. And we also heard a lot of those topics already. So resilience, we heard this many times. When you know your risk, when you know your impacts, then you can react. You can enhance the long-term stability. And this is really giving you a value in terms of resilience. Of course, competitive positioning, show that you are future ready. This gives you a competitive advantage, show that you are using the technology that is at hand. And this really gives you a lot of value in terms of competitiveness. Better rating. So if we are talking numbers here, if you have better ESG rating, you unlock new fundings, you unlock new markets. Also, when we're talking about bank rating, so the banking sector already uses a lot of sustainability ratings, and if you are performing well there, then of course you have access to better financing term, and that also increases your value. And lastly, attractiveness. Sustainability might not be the most trending topic now, but it's still relevant, and it's still relevant especially among young people. So if you are in the race for young people, if you want to acquire young, talented people, then it's always good to show that you are a responsibility, that you are a responsible company, and that you are a sustainable company, and that you are future ready, and that you have the future in mind. And this really wins you the young talents, and this actually also gives you a great value. And of course, in green you see the values added. I try to phrase them in a little bit more tangible way. So we see profitability, growth, stability, profit, and so on. Those are buzzwords, but I think everybody of you can come up with even more value when thinking of those sustainability values. And maybe some striking words almost at the end. So if you are pursuing this value-focused approach, this really means that you're doing smart sustainability. And no presentation would be good without some key takeaways. So I also brought 4 with me. Like I said, we gathered them together with expert, with customer, and so on. So first of all, it's always good to invest into long-term processes instead of just running behind compliance requirements. So here it's really about acting instead of reacting. And how is this possible? This is possible if you build a scalable sustainability framework. So you are really able to adapt to challenges, to adapt to the shifting regulatory landscapes. And how do we build those frameworks? Of course, with the help of data. So again, smart digitalization is key here. Use your data right. So use the data you put into the system right, but also use the data you get out of the system in a right way. So it's not just compliance data, but it's also creating a value like we just know. So when you get the data out, think of, okay, what you can do with the data. And last but not least, don't lose the sight of the big picture here. I know this also sounds very striking, but really think of, okay, what are your core value? What do you want to achieve? How do you want to achieve this? Really don't lose the sight of the bigger picture here. Don't chase too many regulation, but do smart sustainability. And I think when you have those questions in mind, then you are geared for the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.